Okay, alors welcome to the new episode of A Thought Experiment.
Okay, let's get right into it. Episode 19 of A Thought Experiment. I thank you for being here, for listening. If this is your first episode, welcome. If this is your 10th episode, welcome. If this is your 19th episode, well, then you might be like one of 3 people. Because we've had some episodes with low numbers, 4, 5 listeners. So that means there's a select group of people who are on episode 19. And to you, I thank you. Probably my mom. So thank you for listening and for being my mom. But let's keep it rolling. The first thing I want to talk about this week is the idea of context. You know, we're recording a night episode right now, which is not typical. Usually I record during the day, but I'm working a baseball camp here in Regensburg, and safe to say the baseball camps in Europe are a little different than the baseball camps in America, especially the ones I grew up going to. A lot more breaks, a lot more water breaks, a lot more non-baseball games at the baseball camp. Granted, it is a 9-hour camp, which is crazy. It's a little bit of daycare. It's a little bit of daycare baseball camp. I think the age is like 10 to 12. And, last camp we had a kid, he wasn't sure which hand he threw with. I still don't know if he knows what hand he throws with. But, that's some of the players that we're bringing in. And granted, they don't have a professional. We're the most professional team they look up to here. They don't have the major leagues to go. And I was going to Mariners games every week, growing up. And so it's just a different learning experience. You're creating different contexts in your own life. And context is important in understanding why some of these kids don't know which hand they throw with. They've never been to a baseball game. Their parents just dropped them off. So we try out both, right and left-handed, and still neither was good. That's okay. But acquiring context from people is one of the coolest things about traveling. And as I travel and travel more, I create a cultural context that widens, meeting people from all over the world. The cultural net of context that I acquire gets larger. And that's so fun because, of course, you can ask the same question to anyone and get a different answer. But the variations in the answers based on where someone's from is just so much more broad. There's less shared experiences. And that's so fun to ask those type of questions and just learn how someone grew up. Someone in Chile, how they grew up. And that's one of my favorite things to do. But for right now, we're flying solo. We're flying by the seat of our pants. And yeah, we're doing it. The word this week is Protean. Not to be confused with protein. Protean, Protean, is an adjective. Can be described as of or resembling Proteus in having a varied nature or ability to assume different forms. Can also be defined as displaying great diversity or variety. Now you might think, okay, who's Proteus? I wondered that same thing when I found this word. Proteus was a sea god under Poseidon. Now, Proteus was known for a few pretty cool things. He was a cool guy. He was known for prophecy, given the gift of omniscience, meaning he was a knower of all things. He knew everything past, present, and future. Now, because of that, people would often seek Proteus for answers. Makes sense, he knows everything. Now, something else he was known for was the ability to shapeshift. He had the ability to change form. He could move from a storm to a fire to water to an object to an animal quickly, rapidly, which allowed him to elude the people that were trying to capture him for information, because Proteus did not want to give away information. He did not do it willingly. People sought him. This led to his elusiveness, which is one of the other things he was known for with the shape-shifting. He could move quickly, be in and out of forms very rapidly. Now, he was also known for taking daily naps on the beach. Remember, he's a sea god living near the sea. He would take daily naps on the beach, often near seals, which I never found out why that was important, but seals chill, big chillers. Now, from the god Proteus, we get the word Protean, which we go back to the definition, displaying great diversity or variety, the ability to shapeshift, to change forms. Now, you could look at Proteus, the god, and you could see him as a resemblance of maybe the truth. And people sought him because they sought the truth. He had the truth, the knower of all things. And in order for someone to acquire the truth, they must hold on to Proteus as he changes forms, which could be seen as when we seek the truth, it will not always go in a direction that we foresee happening, but it always, the truth is what is necessary. And so it was only when Proteus realized that someone was unwilling to give up that he would give them the truth in which they sought. But we'll get back to the word Protean here. Let's bring our focus back to Protean. And why is Protean important? It's important to distinguish that the idea of shape-shifting as it relates to the word Protean is not done so out of avoidance. Rather, the shape-shifting is done so out of intelligence and awareness. Now, in relating the importance of having Protean-like qualities to leadership, yes, a leader remains steady in who they are. But having Protean-like qualities allows them to be aware of the people that they're leading as well as themselves and be able to navigate the changes that occur when you lead people. As a leader, knowing when to take it easy, go harder, when to push, when to give a break, as well as what character you have to move into. As a leader, you have to take on parental figure, you have to take on a disciplinary, a friend, a mentor, all of these different, as well as the skills you have to have and which one you're going to lean into at that moment. The analogy that came up as I was thinking about this was tetherball. Remember we used to play tetherball in elementary school. And so you think, a tetherball, you have the pole that the ball swings around. So if you imagine the leader or a person being the pole, and the rope that is attached to the pole being short. Imagine it being short. And there's a ball on the end of it. And so you can imagine when the rope is short and the ball swings around the pole, it doesn't have much range. It doesn't have much distance from the pole. It doesn't have a huge variety of angles that it can move at. Now, as we acquire different skills, as we acquire Protean qualities, the length of that rope becomes longer. And with that, the ball is able to move at a greater range around that pole. And yet what's unmoving? The pole is unmoving because the leader, the person, is centered. They're centered in who they are, but they're just acquiring different skills and different qualities, and the ability to move throughout these and shapeshift allows that rope to elongate, and the ball is able to move at greater angles, varying angles, and a greater range around the pole, which is why it's so important for a leader of any capacity to have Protean-like qualities. And the story that I'm going to go into this week is about two leaders who had Protean-like qualities. And those people are Meriwether Lewis and William Clark, better known as Lewis and Clark. I just finished the book Undaunted Courage, which is about the expedition of Lewis and Clark. Now, to give a little context on Lewis and Clark, they were both Virginia Army men. They met in the Army only for a brief amount of time. And from 1801 to 1803, Lewis lives with Thomas Jefferson. Now, as he's living with Thomas Jefferson, he knows that he's meant to go on a great adventure of some kind. He doesn't know what it is, but he yearns for the opportunity to go into the unknown. And Thomas Jefferson is also very land hungry at the time. They just purchased the Louisiana Purchase from Napoleon, from the French. And so now they've purchased basically the middle portion of what is now the United States. Remember, at this time, they're just over on the eastern seaboard, really. And so they've just purchased the middle of the country. Out west, everything west of Louisiana is kind of in the unknown. You know, they knew about Indians, but they were very unsure about them. They only knew about them. They had no context about the Indians. And for that reason, they brought about a lot of questions. Now, Thomas Jefferson, being someone who was a visionary, was very interested in the length of the Missouri River. He wanted to know if the Missouri River would feed all the way to the Pacific River. Nope, not the Pacific River, the Pacific Ocean. He wanted to know if the Missouri River would feed all the way to the Pacific Ocean. And this would open up trade lines. Now, along those trade lines are the Indians. Along this river, he knew there were Indians. So as he's coming up with this plan in his head of, okay, how can we explore the western part of this continent? Okay, well, I need someone who has Protean qualities. You know, while Lewis was living at Thomas Jefferson's house, or the president's house, that sounds a little cooler than Thomas Jefferson's house, the president's house, from 1801 to 1803, Thomas Jefferson is teaching him things such as botany and zoology, medicine, celestial navigation, and surveying in order to tell where they were, latitude and longitude. They didn't have the iPhone yet. Couldn't pull out the iPhone and just see where you were at on the map. Ethnography and diplomacy, which was essential because of the Indians that were known to be on this route, as well as the use of various guns and tools. Obviously, Lewis was known to be a sharpshooter, but he had him learn the use of other, guns and tools because they're essential on this trip. Now, he enlists Lewis to take on this great adventure, what is called the Corps of Discovery. Immediately, Lewis knows that he needs another person to lead with him in this journey, which shows just the amount of foresight that he had and the self-awareness that he had. So he hits up William Clark, who was his commander at one time in the Army. He hits up William Clark because he respected William Clark so much for his steady nature and his leadership abilities. And Lewis, which is part of what I learned throughout this book, was manic depressive. So depression was known to run in his family. And I think he recognized that within himself, that at times I can be unstable. So I need a very stable figure around me as we go on this great expedition. So he brings on William Clark, writes him a letter. Takes about a month and a half to reply. William Clark's like, I'm in. Let's go. Okay. Now it's up to Lewis to acquire a crew. Now, any great crew has people of varying skill sets, and it's up to the leader to recognize those skill sets and put people in the positions where they can succeed. So there were 28 enlisted men. And on May 14th, 1804, they take off. They take off for the west, up the Missouri River. Now, this is all fine and dandy, the story of Lewis and Clark and how, they founded the West. But what I really wanted to highlight on was in June 1805. In June 1805, they arrive at the Marias River Fork in present-day central Montana. So, I mean, they got all the way from, Virginia to Montana. They're doing it. At this point, he's come across, thousands of Indians, different tribes, and been able to kind of unarm them. And at this time, he was going around proposing to these Indians that it was in their best interest to follow the United States. The United States would take care of them, but they needed to kind of pledge their allegiance. There it is. Did that in elementary school all the time. Pledge their allegiance to the United States. Some tribes did this more willingly than others, but all the tribes had the recognition that, we don't have the manpower to fight them. And also because Indian tribes were so at war with one another. And so because of their inability to all come together, they had no chance at defeating any type of, American army. So they're at the Marias Fork, which is very close to what the Indians have told them is Great Falls, Montana. So Great Falls, Montana is kind of the next thing that Lewis had circled as to, where they're headed when they know they'll still be on the right way. So they get to the Marias Fork and it's a fork. So there's the option to go north or south. Now they spend a couple days kind of mapping out the area, going up each fork, trying to figure out which way is the true Missouri, which way is going to lead us, to the Pacific. And Lewis and Clark come to the conclusion that, okay, we need to take the South Fork. This is against the opinion of every single other man in their group. 28 enlisted men. Sacagawea was with them at the time. Sacagawea's baby daddy, not her husband, baby daddy. I forgot his name. He actually ends up being so unimportant. He had, quick little tangent, at the end of the journey, Lewis writes kind of a glowing review for everyone that was in the camp, except for this guy that was Sacagawea's baby daddy, who was, I believe, French. And she had been captured, and I'm pretty sure he bought her from the captures. Facts could be a little off on that. That's not where we're focused on, though. But he writes this glowing review, and for the guy, he just kind of says, he didn't really have any skills. And from the stories that Lewis writes about, he almost killed the whole adventure, which is crazy because Sacagawea was so vital to the entire adventure. Regardless, let's get back to the fork. And so they come across this fork. Lewis and Clark are like, we need to go to the South Fork. Everyone else is like, the North Fork is going to take us to Great Falls. Well, once Lewis and Clark make their mind up, everyone else follows suit 100% without any hesitation. It's like, okay, we gave our opinion and the leaders made their decisions, and now we go forth 100% with their decision. And on June 13th, 1805, they arrive at Great Falls, Montana, which is just a couple days later. So Lewis and Clark are proven to be correct. And what's so cool about Lewis's journal is that never in his journal, when they reach Great Falls, does he ever talk about, I was right. He just talks about the beauty of Great Falls. So it was so unimportant to him for his own personal ego to be right. He was always about the best interest of the group. It's what made him such a great leader. And you look at like his ability to switch roles, he's always the captain, but you look at his ability to switch roles, as soon as they make this decision to go on the South Fork, okay, he becomes the captain again. Now as they arrive to Great Falls, he begins map making. He begins, taking note of the animals in the area as well as the plants. Like he's switching roles so fast, so consistently for the betterment of this country, which he was so inspired to go forth and do. Now the decision at Maria's Fork, which, essential for the journey, also leads them to a camp in the fall of 1805, which is near Lewiston, Idaho, right on the eastern border of Washington. Now, Lewiston, Idaho has a deep lore for me, specifically Lewis and Clark State, the college that is in Lewiston, Idaho. Now, we began talking, this episode talking about baseball camps. Well, baseball camps are what led me to Lewiston, Idaho. When I was a kid, I used to go to these camps called Stubbs baseball camps. And every good player in Washington for probably 25 years went through Stubbs baseball camps. Didn't matter if you're a pitcher, outfielder, infielder, whatever it was, you went to Stubbs baseball camps. And I became one of Stubbs' favorite campers ever. And so I started going maybe around the age 6 or 7. Around the age 9, I believe, he tells my dad, he goes, okay, I want to take Morgan over to Lewis and Clark State. And I want him to practice with the team. I'm friends with the coach, Ed Cheff. I didn't know what Lewis and Clark State was, but he always wore a Lewis and Clark State shirt in all their national championships on the bottom. Lewis and Clark is an NAIA university. And so I believe it was the summer of 2006, Bill Stubbs brings me over to Lewis and Clark State. Our whole family drove over. And when we're going back to meet this coach, Bill Stubbs turns around to my mom and my sister and goes, no women past this point. So my dad and I keep on walking, and I meet Ed Cheff in his office. And at the time, I was just going with the flow. He brought me there, and I got to go out. In the heat of Idaho in August, I practiced with the team. I took ground balls, stretched with the team, played catch. The team's probably like, who is this little kid that's out here? But because Ed Cheff said it was okay, and because he trusted Bill Stubbs, I got to be out there. And what would turn into one of the most influential baseball experiences of my entire life, one of the most influential experiences of my entire life. I remember practicing with them that summer, and then they would come, and this is at the time when NAIA schools would play Division I schools. So I remember they came and played the University of Washington, and my dad took me out of school to bat boy. I would go in bat boy, and Ed Cheff would let me take pregame, infield, and outfield with the team. Now, before I keep going, let's give a little context on Ed Cheff. He spent 34 seasons at Lewis and Clark State from 1977 to 2010. His record was 1,705, 430, and 2. So that brings him to essentially 80% winning percentage, which is incredible. One of the greatest in any collegiate sport of all time. In those 34 seasons, he won 16 national championships. highlighted by a six-peat. He went on a six-peat from 1987 to 1992 and capped off with a three-peat from 2006 to 2008. And I remember going to the University of Washington, getting to bat boy, and it was just, the coolest thing ever, especially being older now, and that's just not something that ever gets to happen for many kids. And Ed Cheff was a very militant-like leader. And it makes sense now that I know more about NAIA schools. NAIAs are essentially four-year JUCOs. A lot of the players at NAIAs are obviously overlooked, but there's also a lot of issues as far as grades. Sometimes there are character issues. No one's first choice is an NAIA, but they're essential. And Ed Cheff churned out big leaguers out of this school. And it's part of the context why I have so much empathy for bat boys now. All throughout my collegiate and professional career, I've always had empathy for bat boys because I got to do that. So bringing them in on the fun of the team, they're part of the team. They're not just a bat boy, they're part of the unit, our collective unit. And Ed Cheff was a unique character in the sense that if two players at the end of the fall or the end of, right before the season were even in terms of a positional battle, shortstop, second base, wherever, they would get into a boxing ring and box it out, and the winner won the job for, the start of the season, which is not something that is even close to being allowed now. But he went by the idea of who wants it more. And so being around Lewis and Clark State for that 2007 season, we didn't go over to the World Series. Now, Lewis and Clark State hosts the World Series every year. And they do this because they get the most fans. They've tried it in other locations, didn't work out. 2007, they go to win the national championship as part of the three-peat. So 2008 rolls around. I go back over to Lewis and Clark State in the summer before the season, practice with the team again. He would do things like, I remember he made a player who was hitting off the tee hit the other way, and he stood in the middle of the cage, maybe 20 feet from the player, and was like, you're either going to hit me or you're going to hit it the other way. And he hit it the other way. I remember that distinctly. That is burned in my vision. But he would let me hit off the machines with the team. Try to hit off the machines. But he just let me be part of the team. And for being such a militant, hard-nosed coach, the empathy he showed towards me is something that I've obviously never forgotten, and I've taken it with me throughout my whole life. And so we go back over in 2008 to the World Series, which they're hosting. And I got to bat boy for the entire World Series. And what's so interesting as I reflect on that experience was that they lost to Lee University early in the tournament. And they had to come back through the losers bracket and beat Lee University twice in the finals to take home the national championship. They had to beat them twice because Lee University didn't have a loss. And what's so amazing about that is when I won a gold medal with USA Baseball, we lost to Japan in the round robin and then came back to beat Japan in the gold medal game. Additionally, when I won a national championship at Chipola Junior College, we lost to Walter State in the first game of the World Series and then came back to win, I believe, 8 games in a row, knocking off Walter State in the championship. So, both of those championship teams that I've been a part of, we lost to the team that we eventually beat in the finals. And just like at Lewis and Clark State, which started, some 10, 15 years earlier, they lost to the team that they would eventually beat. And so it just shows that, I think if anything, it just taught me resiliency in the fact that, you're never out of the fight, ever, never out. And there's just something magical about being able to lose and then have that loss give you confidence. And as we, the only reason that Lewiston, Idaho is a thing is because Lewis and Clark made the right decision at the Marias Fork. And it never made sense to me in talking about context. Lewis and Clark State Warriors. They were the Warriors. And I never thought about why they were the Warriors. It never occurred to me. And as I'm reading Undaunted Courage, it hits me when Lewis is writing in his journal about the dangers that they're facing on an everyday basis and the readiness that he had to kill before being killed and kill for the people that he was leading, him and Clark. And it hit me. I was like, oh, Lewis and Clark were the embodiment of warriors and a warrior mentality. And it's so fitting that Lewis and Clark State, they're the Warriors. And Ed Cheff brought that a true warrior mentality to that college and brought them, 16 national championships. As I got older, I tried to make it a point to call him, once a year. And I remember I was in college. I hadn't talked to him in a while, and I called, and I'll never forget sometimes his wife would pick up the phone because it was like their home phone, and he'd always come and I'd just have a little chat, but I was always just thankful for all that he included me in. And I'll never forget the day that I called their house and his wife picked up and she started crying immediately because she knew I was going to ask, is Ed there? And Ed was not there. He passed away at their home. And so in reflection of Ed Cheff and all that he provided me in terms of opportunities in my own life, and I just send him many thanks. And it makes so much sense as to why they are the Lewis and Clark State Warriors. He was the true embodiment. He was a warrior himself. And he brought that to everyone. But he also showed such Protean qualities in the way that he was able to be so disciplined and regimented with his group, with his team, and then show such compassion and humor with his team and also me. As soon as you start bringing a 9-year-old around and you're coaching a group of men, he also he's bringing another variable into the mix. And I don't know if he was ever aware that I was even there because he didn't change his coaching style, obviously, because I was there. But, then he'd come up in the dugout and make a joke with me during the game, during a World Series game. And seeing the intensity that he could have and then be able to switch so quickly to what was necessary at the time, whether it was humor or a softness or a disciplined conversation or a teaching moment, and understanding how each person most effectively brought in information. And that's what makes a leader so skilled and why the word Protean is so prevalent as it relates to leadership and a leader's ability to, shapeshift out of awareness and out of intelligence and out of recognition for what is best for the group. Lewis and Clark were in danger for 2 years, 4 months, and 9 days straight. Every day they were in danger for their lives. But they were visionaries and they saw, the potential of what could be. And man, what an incredible, incredible journey. Only one time in those 2 years, 4 months, and 9 days did they ever start on a trek, on a quest, and have to go back. Only one time. They left too early. The Indians told them, don't leave at this time. There's too much snow up ahead where you're headed. And they got a little restless because it was on their journey back home. And they got into the thick of the snow and realized they had the wherewithal too, the awareness to be like, we can't keep pushing. And that was the only time they ever retreated or ever made a false step on this journey that he wrote about. Maybe there were others that he didn't write about. But he's pretty open about a lot of things in his journals. One of the things he's very open with is the danger of grizzly bears. No, at least American, had ever seen a grizzly bear. And, they meet the Indians, and the Indians are like, hey, where you're headed, there's a lot of these big brown bears, and they are dangerous. And as Lewis writes, he's like, yeah, the Indians told us that there are these dangerous animals up ahead, and they're huge, and this and that, but they have arrows, and we have guns. Of course, we're just going to take care of these animals. It's not going to be a problem for us. And the first grizzly bear they run into, they shoot it. It literally just dusts it off. Like, what? Ends up chasing them. It takes 5 of them to shoot these little, they're basically shooting pepper pellets at this gun at the time, or at this bear at the time in, 1805. And finally they down this bear, and Lewis just goes in his journal and writes, that is the scariest thing I've ever seen in my entire life. I would rather take on 2 Indians by myself than 1 bear. And isn't that the truth? Because, going forward in his journals, the bears only get more prevalent. He's always writing about how dangerous it is to see a grizzly bear. And I've never seen one in person, but man, that'd be cool. In a safe setting. I don't need to see a grizzly bear one-on-one. Lewis saw a grizzly bear one-on-one. He shoots this grizzly bear, realizes, damn, I don't have time to reload. Turns and starts running. And he's writing this in his journal, obviously, as the story. And he's running, and he runs into a river, a very shallow river, so no problem for this bear. This is the bear's, this is their ground. Their arena. And he runs out midway into this river, and the bear stares at him on the bank of the river. Stares, turns away, and leaves. And he chased him for, 20, 30 yards before that. And Lewis writes in his journal, I have zero idea why that bear did not kill me. Act of God. Crazy. And it has led him to Lewiston, Idaho, which led me to Lewis and Clark State, which led me to a European baseball camp this week, and it all comes full circle. It all comes full circle. And the book, becomes quite sad at the end. I never knew, here's a spoiler for you, Lewis kills himself. And it seems that he kills himself, he's, as I mentioned before, he was, manic depressive. And he is noted as he's, on the outside looking in the sense that he feels as though no one in society now can really relate. They can't draw any context to what he's seen. This adventure that he's been on, other than Clark, obviously, and the men that were with him, but they can't be with him all the time. And so he really, obviously, he kills himself. He really struggles with that notion of no one can understand what I've seen, what I've been through, how I've gotten to where I'm at right now. And there is a unique essence that comes with being a part of any team, especially in sports or in adventure or going into the unknown. You see it on ESPN all the time. These clowns, they talk about, what they think is going on in the locker room or whatever it may be. And, even ex-players, they know what it's like in a locker room, a general sense. I know what it's like in a locker room in a general sense, but each specific locker room at each specific moment is so different, and they're taking on this journey that is so unique. That's the beauty of being on a team, is that no one else can understand what goes on inside that locker room except those people in it. You could try to explain it. You could have gone through it in other contexts, other sports, other teams, maybe the same sport, but if you're not in that specific one, you don't know. That's the beauty of a locker room. And now, being someone who gets to lead a team is one of the most special opportunities you can be given, because whoever appointed you the leader of that team saw the Protean qualities that were in you and your ability, your potential and the ability to lead a group, which is amazing. For someone to believe in you that much, I mean, it's incredible. And I think for Lewis, it really weighed on him that, like, man, this journey that I've gone on can never be recreated, and no one can ever begin to understand. Not even one of his mentors, Thomas Jefferson, can understand the journey that I've been on, what I've gone through. A great book, I'm sure it'd be a great audible as well, Undaunted Courage. And so that gives you a little bit of context both about Lewis and Clark and about myself and the deep lore that comes in Lewiston, Idaho and Lewis and Clark State and the warrior mentality. And it gave me great context in the history of, my country. And when you gain context, it gives you more pride. I feel more prideful in my country now and learning that and the risks that the Corpse of Discovery took in trying to acquire understanding of the great unknown that was the West. And man, they finally get out to the Pacific and they write about how much it rains and how they kind of hate it and they want to leave. And when they're writing about that, I love Seattle. Seattle's one of the most beautiful places in the world. I've been all over the world and there is no summertime like a Seattle summertime. But damn, when it is raining in the fall and the winter, I feel their pain. I do. I can resonate with that. I have that context. As we wind down this episode, maybe we just take one deep breath together. Inhaling through the nose, expanding the belly, feel the ribs expand laterally. Just let it go out the mouth. All the way, bringing your navel to your spine, sitting up a little taller, relaxing the shoulders, taking the tension away. And we'll just leave you with this question. Who is someone you haven't told how much you truly appreciate? Maybe this just provides an opportunity to go tell them. And that concludes this episode of A Thought Experiment.